Richard Wright. Now, Richard Wright was a famous author, wrote many books. Wright was another former communist who believed that American anti-communist politics was more important than freedom from European colonial oppression. As with Rustin, Wright was an ex-communist who believed African freedom, or saw African freedom, as a communist threat. However, Wright had at least some understanding of his connections to Africa. He understood his heritage to be Africa. He states in his book Black Power, "I am African. I am of African descent." However, like many Europeanized Africans, particularly in the USA, he had very little understanding of African as an identity, as a political identity. In the same book, he questioned, but am I African? And what does being African mean? Something I've discussed a number of times in previous videos. Wright moved to Ghana, which was then known as the Gold Coast, in an effort to answer these questions. He developed a friendship with Kwame Nkrumah, leader of the Ghanaian struggle for independence from Britain, and George Padmore, a Trinidadian who had become Nkrumah's advisor. Despite an appreciation of European colonialist oppression and knowing the lies told about Africa to keep it suppressed, Wright was prepared to betray his friendship with Nkrumah and Padmore by passing on information about their activities to USA government agencies. He was naively unaware that helping to maintain colonial oppression, keeping Africa down, gave Europeans the freedom to do as they wish with black people worldwide. In other words, he was actually contributing to his own oppression. Wright and Rustin's fear of communist takeover of Africa was no justification for their actions. Kwame Nkrumah made it clear, as did most African leaders, that their struggle was for the freedom of Africa and Africans at home and abroad. It had nothing to do with European politics. Nkrumah expressed this in probably one of his most famous quotes: "We face neither east nor west. We face forward." George Padmore, who was also an ex-member of the Communist Party, wrote a book titled Pan-Africanism or Communism. This was an attempt to counter European suspicions that African independence was essentially communist-inspired. This didn't counter the fears of men such as Rustin and Wright, and they're not alone amongst Europeanized blacks, as being driven more by their commitment to their former masters than to freedom for black people worldwide. This commitment to their masters is probably why they're seen as heroes in European societies, because they helped those societies, they helped them to maintain their supremacy and racism. It didn't help us to be free.